Okay, so in this video, we'll be discussing the types of epithelial tissues. And if you recall in the last one, we talked about there being three shapes: simple squamous, which was the flattened cells; cuboidal, which were the cube-shaped cells; and columnar, which were taller than they were wide or deep. And then we talked also about the different arrangements that these cells might come in, whether they were simple epithelia, a single layer, or stratified epithelia. So when we do mix and match, then we can make three simple epithelia: a simple squamous epithelium, a simple cuboidal epithelium, and a simple columnar epithelium. And when we think about the stratified, mixing and matching those terms, we can talk about stratified squamous, stratified cuboidal, and stratified columnar epithelia. And then there's one other kind of simple epithelium, something that we'll talk about as pseudostratified epithelium. Pseudo means false. So it's false stratification. It's a simple epithelium that appears to be stratified. And then in the stratified epithelium, there's an additional kind called transitional epithelium. And so we'll discuss the transition of this stratified epithelium from appearing to be cuboidal to appearing to be squamous. So let's dive right in. First, we'll talk about the simple squamous epithelium. All right, so simple squamous epithelia are a single layer, and they're thin. So it's a thin, flattened layer of cells. And when you look at them, they have a very thin or elongated nuclei. Now these are very thin, very delicate, very easily damaged tissues, and so they are well protected where they're found. And because it's so thin, it's very useful in places where we require rapid diffusion or filtration of materials. So sometimes the simple squamous epithelium allows fluids to move in between the cells, so that those fluids can move from one compartment to another in the body. So where do we find these simple squamous epithelia? They line they are actually the capillaries of our body. So capillaries are very thin, very delicate structures, and they are built of a simple squamous epithelium. Lymphatic vessels, the very smallest ones, they're called lymphatic capillaries, are also built of simple squamous epithelium. Those body cavity linings, the serosa of the ventral body cavities, they are a simple squamous epithelium. And then finally, in the lungs, we see simple squamous epithelium there, where we're exchanging the oxygen and carbon dioxide gases. So the arrows here are in the picture are indicating the simple squamous epithelium. You can tell that there are cells because we have these darkened nuclei. They stain darker. And they're making just this single layer right along the internal layer of an arteriole. What we're seeing deep to the arteriole is, these are actually muscle tissues here that are deeper in the arteriole, but the innermost layer is called endothelium, and it's built of simple squamous epithelium. All right, so that's the simple squamous epithelium. Now we're going to take a look at simple cuboidal epithelia. Once again, a single layer, but this time they are cube-shaped cells with a central nucleus that is spherical. So here we see the nuclei inside the cells, and you can make out the cell membranes here, compartmentalizing those nuclei. And so here in the kidney tubules, where we remove the wastes from the body, they're built of a single layer. So this is the exterior of the tubule, a basement membrane. And they're built of a single layer of these roughly cube-shaped cells. Now, simple cuboidal epithelia may have microvilli on the apical surfaces, Microvilli, remember, what is their function? Think for a second. Pause if you need to. Hopefully you thought about increasing surface area. And these function, again, to move materials across the epithelium. So these simple epithelia, even though they're not squamous, they are still great places to move materials across the epithelium. And because they're larger cells, they have the machinery, or they have space for the machinery to allow glandular secretion. And so we see them in the linings of the kidney tubules. We also see them on the surface of the ovary. So here, where the ovary is covered with a layer of cells, it's a simple squamous epithelium. And in many exocrine glands, their ducts are built of this simple cuboidal epithelium. Oh, did I say squamous around ovary surface? I meant, of course, a simple cuboidal epithelium. All right, so now let's take a look at the simple columnar epithelia. With simple columnar epithelium, once again, it's a single layer of cells, but this time the cells are relatively tall. So here is one cell, here's another cell, they're kind of squeezed in. Here's another one, you can make out the nuclei here, here, and here in these cells. Here is another one, there's one here, there's its nucleus, and so on. So hopefully you get the idea. So these are tall, taller than they are wide, and deep, and they usually have a more basally located nucleus. It looks like the nuclei kind of roughly spaced back and forth, up and down, up and down. And, you know, because we're looking through multiple layers of cells, it's difficult to get a slice where you can see just a single layer of cells. You know, we're also seeing some of the nuclei shining through from the deeper cells. Up here on the apical surface, they can have cilia, or we may see microvilli. Here, the folds of the membrane. And so be sure when you're looking at your sample of simple columnar epithelium, be sure to look to see if you can find anything decorating the apical surface. And they may be interspersed with these cells. This lighter colored cell, that's called a goblet cell. You can kind of see the goblet. You know, here's the drinking portion of the goblet, and here's the stem of the goblet. On this one, you can make that out better than in the others. So they may be interspersed with these mucus-producing goblet cells. And they function primarily in moving materials through the tubes or in moving stuff across the epithelium. And so we see them sometimes in the lining of the digestive tract. That's so down, especially down in the intestine, the small intestine, we'll see digestive tract cells being built of simple columnar epithelia with the microvilli on them. The lining of the ovarian tubes is a simple columnar epithelium that has cilia on them that wave and kind of brush the fluids inside of the reproductive system of a female. Brush those fluids along, and in the process will brush along, or will help an egg to float through the fluids and from the ovary down toward the uterus. All right, next on our list, pseudostratified epithelia. With pseudostratified epithelia, we see a single layer of cells, but some of them are cuboidal and others are columnar. And so this creates, you know, if this is the basement membrane here, some of the cells are tall with their nucleus. Others may be columnar. And these tall ones kind of fill in that space above those columnar cells. And so it winds up giving the appearance of being stratified. because you'll have a layer of nuclei in the cuboidal cells that's closer to the basement membrane, and then because they're kind of squeezed, another layer of nuclei that are higher up in the epithelium. So it creates this appearance of stratification, but if you were to be able to dissect out and find and look really closely, then you would see that all of them attach back to the basement membrane. Most pseudostratified epithelia are ciliated, and here you can see very clearly the cilia decorate the apical surface of the cell, and so those cilia can beat and move mucus usually along the surface. So we see goblet cells interspersed among them, and that's what, here's a goblet cell right there that would be secreting mucus that then could be brushed along by the cilia. And we've talked already about how in the respiratory system, cilia and the mucus clear the surface of the cells of any dust or other debris or bacteria or whatever. So we find them in the passages, these pseudostratified epithelia, in the passages of the respiratory system, and also in the male reproductive system, once again helping to move mucus materials across the surface of the cell. Okay, so those are the simple epithelia. And remember, even though it's pseudostratified, is the appearance, or stratification is the appearance, it's a simple epithelium when we talk about pseudostratified epithelia. All right, so now let's take a look at the stratified epithelia, and we'll start with stratified squamous epithelium. Stratified squamous epithelia are multiple layers of flattened cells, and they arise, though, from cuboidal cells down at the basement membrane. So let's take a look here. This is a bit of skin, or I'm sorry, it's not skin, it's from the human esophagus. So here's the basement membrane right there. I'm going to leave it so that you can see, I'll leave this part over here messed with. So we've got that basement membrane. And if you look at the cells that are right there attached to the basement membrane, these cells are primarily cuboidal. So the basal cells, that basal layer, are cuboidal cells. But notice as they get closer and closer to the apical surface, so here is the apical surface of this tissue. Down here, of course, is the basal layer. As we get closer and closer to the apical surface, the cells become much more flattened. So you can see that the cells get very flattened out. And by the time they get up here, they're just almost, there's not much cell left there. So the basal cells, they constantly reproduce. They get lots of nutrients from this material down here. That's another tissue, a connective tissue, where the blood vessels can be found. And so we have constant reproduction down here as the cells get further and further away from their nutrient and oxygen source. Then they will die, and eventually they flake off. And so this, in the esophagus, helps to protect the esophagus from damage as we swallow a bolus of much drier or rough, scratchy foods. So these stratified squamous epithelia are primarily about protecting the underlying tissues. And so we find stratified squamous cells in areas that require protection, either chemical protection, mechanical protection, so protection from being stretched or damaged in some way, or from drying out. And so locations we might see it are at the anus. I guess I forgot to give you suggestions. The skin surface, in the mouth. So when we did our cheek cells, we were scraping away at a stratified squamous epithelium. I said anus, I meant rectum. Rectum is the pouch at the end of the digestive tract, where just before the anus does stores the fecal material. So the skin, the mouth, the vagina is lined with a stratified squamous epithelium, and so on. All right, next on our list of tissues is, oh, there we are. I knew I had another slide. Sorry about this. So yes, examples in the mouth, the esophagus, the vagina, and the anal canal. Okay, so these stratified squamous epithelia, they may be what's referred to as keratinized. That is, they may accumulate a protein called keratin as they are pushed closer and closer to the surface of the, or to that apical surface of the epithelium. And as they fill with this keratin material, they can harden and flatten, and frequently they die. And this helps to produce a dry, tough, waterproof covering. And this is where we would describe skin as a keratinized epithelium. These that are in, that remain moist are non-keratinized, and the apical cells remain alive and soft and moist. So the mouth, the esophagus, and the vagina, the anal canal, they all are lined with non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelia. And so once again, here are the cells that have been keratinized layer upon layer, and they're all being replenished from these basal layers. So as the cells reproduce down here at the basal layer, they push the layers ever upward, and then up here at the top you can see the keratinized epithelia here in the skin. They are flaking away from the skin surface. Alright, so stratified squamous epithelia. Next on the list then, of course, are stratified cuboidal epithelia. Usually just 2 to 3 layers. Here in this salivary gland, we see 2 layers of stratified cuboidal epithelium. The basement layer here, and then these are the cells that are busy producing saliva. You can see interspersed in here some goblet cells. So this saliva has a little bit of mucus in it. And so they are usually found lining the lumen. A lumen is a hollow cavity. So this would be the lumen here of the salivary gland. And they tend to be fairly rare in the body. We find them in the pancreas and the ducts of the salivary, mammary, and sweat glands of the body. So this is where that salivary material that's being produced would make its passage through the lumen of the tube, and then be squirted out into the mouth. So stratified cuboidal epithelia, fairly rare in the body, as is stratified columnar epithelium. Once again, usually just 2 to 3 layers. Here we see once again a 2-layer stratified columnar epithelium with actually a little bit more cuboidal shaped cells down at the basement membrane, but the second layer tends to be much more columnar shape. And once again, they line the lumens of structures as well, and they are exceedingly rare in the body. We see them in the male urethra. That would be the tube that takes urine from the bladder to the external environment, and also in parts of the pharynx. So that's the throat region. So once again, fairly rare in the body. Last of all, transitional epithelia. And with transitional epithelia, what we see is, and where we find them is only in the urinary system. They line the bladder and the ureters, and can be found in parts of the urethra as well. The ureters are the tubes that take the urine from the kidney to the urinary bladder. And so the urinary bladder, and ureters especially, have to deal with some stress. As the bladder fills with urine, the urinary bladder has to be able to stretch to accommodate the to accommodate all the urine that is being produced. And so what we see with transitional epithelia is that when the bladder is relaxed, the transitional epithelium is cuboidal. So these cells look roughly cuboidal here. These would be the basement layer. Down here this is where the basement membrane is. So we have roughly cuboidal cells as the basement stem cells divide and reproduce. They push these cuboidal cells upward and they grow and enlarge. So here is these are the cells. And what cuboidal, and notice the very unique shape of this cuboidal epithelium. Notice how the cells appear to be disconnected from each other. They make kind of these little domes when the bladder is empty and the tissue is relaxed. But when the bladder fills and the bladder has to stretch to accommodate it, these cells will stretch out as well, and they become very squamous in their shape. And so that allows the urinary bladder to distend and stretch without breaking the connections between the cells. So transitional epithelia, they transition from cuboidal to squamous as the bladder fills. So that's why it's transitional. Okay, so let's see if there's one more slide. And nope, so that's the end of it. So a total of 8 epithelial cells, simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, and finally the pseudostratified epithelia, and then 4 different kinds of stratified epithelia: stratified squamous, stratified cuboidal, stratified columnar, and transitional epithelia. So hopefully now with this it'll be much easier for you to recognize them when you look at them under the microscope. Alright, so that's it for this one, and we'll talk to you soon.